He came to fix a broken stereo for his girlfriend's mother, a simple favor. But in the quiet living room, a forbidden tension ignited. When her hand reached for his, a silent understanding shattered everything he thought he knew. The air in the copper kettle always seemed to hum with a low, contented energy, a mix of grinding beans, steaming milk, and hushed conversations. Jaron Thorne, 23 and still navigating the labyrinthine corridors of his ambitions, found a quiet rhythm in it. Tonight, the rhythm was off-kilter. The sky outside the large front windows on Elmwood Promenade had turned a bruised purple, heavy with the promise of a downpour that was now delivering on its threat with a vengeance. Rain lashed against the glass, making the familiar sounds of the cafe seem muted, distant. He was wiping down the last of the sticky tables, the scent of stale coffee clinging to his worn apron, a ghost of a dream about his future record store flickering in his mind. He envisioned warm lamplight, the rich smell of old vinyl, and the satisfying crackle of a needle dropping onto a groove. The brass bell above the door chimed, a sharp, almost urgent sound that cut through the storm's din. Lila Vance stepped in, her petite frame almost swallowed by the sudden gust of wind that accompanied her. She shook her vibrant magenta umbrella, sending droplets spraying across the polished wood floor. Her golden hair, usually a loose cascade, was pulled back in a damp ponytail, and her nose was dusted with a smattering of freckles that always seemed to dance when she smiled. She was 22, spirited and unpretentious, with an easy laugh that had been a constant, comforting presence in Jaron's life for the past few months. Their connection had blossomed from a spilled latte and shared apologies, evolving into a comfortable, casual dating arrangement. Movie nights at his slightly cramped apartment on Sycamore Lane, long walks along the river, and endless conversations about everything and nothing. "Still holding down the fort, Jaron?" she asked, her voice a bright counterpoint to the storm. "I thought you'd be off communing with your vintage blues collection by now." She shivered slightly, pulling her light cardigan tighter around her. He leaned against the counter, a faint smile playing on his lips. "Someone's got to rescue the innocent from mediocre caffeine. Besides, this sudden deluge has turned us into a reluctant shelter for the weary. What brings you out in this tempest, Lila? I thought you were curled up with that new dystopian novel you were so excited about." She shrugged, a faint flush rising on her cheeks. "Mom sent me. Emergency run for her precious sparkling water. We're having a late dinner, and apparently the world stops spinning if her Pellegrino supply runs dry." Lila rolled her eyes with an exaggerated sigh, but the underlying affection for her mother was unmistakable. "She has particular tastes." Jaron nodded, a practiced feigned understanding. He knew Elara Vance only through Lila's vivid, albeit often slightly exasperated, descriptions. A successful freelance architect, impeccably dressed, with a love for abstract art and European cinema. Lila often spoke of her mother's demanding work schedule, her frequent travels, which had always served as a convenient explanation for why their paths had never crossed during Jaron's visits to their stately townhouse on Willowbrook Crescent. He had built a mental image of a sophisticated, perhaps slightly aloof woman, perpetually busy. "Well, you're in luck," Jaron said, gesturing towards the shelf behind him, stocked with an array of imported glass bottles. "We just got a fresh shipment of the Italian stuff. Consider it on the house. A reward for enduring my questionable taste in early 2000s indie rock." Lila laughed, a clear, bell-like sound that warmed the small space. "Oh, please, your taste is impeccable. You introduced me to the Whispering Pines album, and now I can't listen to anything else. You're corrupting me, Jaron Thorne." Her smile was easy, her gaze direct, and for a moment the world felt simple and uncomplicated. As she moved towards the back of the shop, selecting a few bottles, the sky outside truly unleashed its fury. The rain escalated from a heavy downpour to a torrential deluge, hammering against the windows, blurring the world beyond. Thunder cracked overhead, a visceral roar that vibrated through the floorboards, making the old building tremble. The streetlights flickered erratically, casting long, dancing shadows. Looks like you're grounded for a while, Jaron observed, peering out at the watery chaos. There's no way you're navigating that storm on foot. Lila sighed, glancing at her phone, her brow furrowing slightly. Great. Mom's going to have a fit. She hates when I'm out late, especially in bad weather. She gets anxious. Anxious about what? Jaron asked, genuinely curious. Lila always struck him as fiercely independent, resilient. Everything, Lila said, her voice dropping, a subtle shift in her demeanor. She's always been hypervigilant, ever since my dad died a few years ago. It's just been the two of us for a long time, and I think she feels this immense responsibility to keep me safe. It's a lot for her. Jaron's expression softened. He knew about the loss of Lila's father, a quiet, somber detail she'd shared once, almost in passing. He hadn't pressed, respecting the unspoken boundaries of grief. I'm sorry, Lila, he said, his voice quiet. I didn't realize the depth of it. It's okay, she murmured, forcing a small, brave smile. She's stronger now, but some scars just never quite heal. Anyway, I should probably call her. Let her know I haven't been swept away by a flash flood. Lila stepped just outside the shop's entrance, trying to get a better signal, her silhouette framed by the churning gray outside. Jaron, meanwhile, began the ritualistic dance of closing, the low hiss of the espresso machine powering down, the rhythmic clinking of stacked ceramic mugs, the satisfying swipe of his cloth as he polished the stainless steel counter until it gleamed. The rain continued its relentless assault, a powerful drumming symphony. A few minutes later, Lila returned, her shoulders visibly slumped. No luck. The cell service is shot, and the rideshare apps are completely unresponsive. I can't even hail a regular cab. Mom's probably convinced I've been abducted by a rogue streetcar. Her attempt at humor fell flat, replaced by genuine frustration. Jaron hesitated, a thought forming. His ancient sedan, the Wanderer, affectionately named for its tendency to drift subtly to the right, was parked in the narrow alley behind the shop. It was a rust-speckled, dented relic from the late 90s, prone to sputtering fits on cold mornings, but utterly dependable, a chariot of champions in its own way. Look, he said, reaching for his keys, the metal cold against his palm. It's no problem. I can just drive you home. It's practically on my way, or close enough anyway. He lived a few miles past Willowbrook Crescent, in a less manicured, more industrial part of town, near the old foundry district. Lila's eyes widened, a flicker of surprise in their depths. Really? Jaron, you don't have to. It's late and you've had a long shift. I wouldn't want to inconvenience you. Nonsense, he insisted, already pushing through the staff door. It's coming down in sheets out there, and besides, I wouldn't want your mom to worry herself into an early grave. I'll get you home safe and sound. Consider it premium customer service, the kind you can't put a price on. He offered a light-hearted wink, trying to dispel the awkwardness of the offer. She smiled then, a genuine, relieved curve of her lips. You really are the best, Jaron. Seriously, thank you. They locked up the copper kettle, the dim interior settling into quiet slumber behind them. He led her through the narrow, water-slicked alley, the air thick with the smell of wet pavement and exhaust fumes, to where the Wanderer waited, a humble, steadfast sentinel against the storm. The drive through the rain-lashed streets was a muted affair. The wipers swished a frantic rhythm against the glass, and the occasional flash of lightning illuminated the grand silhouette of homes that lined Willowbrook Crescent. It was a neighborhood of quiet, understated wealth, where ancient oak trees arched over the winding streets, their branches dripping with rainwater. It's just up here, on the left, Lila said, her voice softer now, pointing towards a particularly grand house. It sat far back from the road, behind a meticulously manicured lawn that was now a shimmering expanse of green. The porch was wide, adorned with elegant hanging baskets of petunias, now drenched. Lights glowed warmly from within, casting inviting squares of golden light onto the wet driveway. Jaron turned into the long, curving driveway, the tires crunching softly on the gravel. As he brought the wanderer to a gentle stop, the front door of the house swung open. A figure stepped out onto the porch, framed by the warm, inviting light from within. She was a silhouette at first, slender and tall, her posture remarkably poised, even in the dim light. He could make out the elegant sweep of her hair, gathered loosely at the nape of her neck. As she descended a few steps from the porch, moving into the subtle glow of the landscape lighting, her features sharpened, became clearer. And then Jaron's breath caught, a silent, almost painful hitch in his chest. This was not the sophisticated, slightly aloof woman he had imagined from Lila's descriptions. This was Elara Vance, and she was, quite simply, devastatingly beautiful. Her hair, a rich, dark chocolate, cascaded in soft, natural waves past her shoulders, catching the faint light with an almost iridescent sheen. There was a single, defiant strand of silver, like a delicate thread of moonlight, woven into the dark expanse above her left temple. It wasn't a sign of age, but a testament to a life lived, a whisper of stories etched into her very being. Her eyes, even from the distance of his car, seemed to hold an extraordinary depth, a quiet intensity that was both captivating and strangely disquieting. They were the color of warm amber, flecked with deeper gold, and they regarded him with a calm, almost piercing scrutiny that felt as though she was seeing straight through him, beyond the superficial. She wore a simple, yet impeccably tailored charcoal gray dress. The fabric flowed around her, hinting at the graceful curves beneath, subtly emphasizing her height and elegance. There was an understated luxury to her presentation, a quiet confidence that radiated from her. Her face was beautifully sculpted, with high cheekbones, a delicate jawline, and lips that were a natural, soft rose. Faint lines, almost imperceptible, etched themselves around the corners of her eyes. Not from age, but perhaps from years of quiet observation, or perhaps from the lingering echoes of pain. They only added to her allure, giving her a fragile, approachable wisdom. She was clearly older than he had pictured, significantly older than Lila, but her beauty transcended age. It was a mature, resilient beauty, refined by experience, tempered by loss, and imbued with an undeniable, quiet strength. She moved with an unhurried grace, a poised composure that belied the late hour and the damp night air. There was an indefinable aura about her, a quiet magnetism that drew his gaze and held it, refusing to let go. An unfamiliar tremor ran through Jaron, a strange cocktail of awe, admiration, and a profound, unsettling apprehension. He was dating her daughter, and he was standing, rather awkwardly, in her elegant driveway, feeling suddenly acutely aware of his scuffed sneakers, the faint smell of stale coffee clinging to his clothes, and the vast, undeniable chasm between their worlds. You won't believe who took his side. This is just the start. It gets stronger. The silence in the driveway stretched, thick and heavy, punctuated only by the relentless drip of water from the eaves and the distant murmur of the retreating storm. Jaron, caught in Elara Vance's amber gaze, felt his heart thrumming an erratic rhythm against his ribs. Lila, oblivious to the sudden shift in the atmospheric pressure, swung open the passenger door, a wave of relieved gratitude washing over her face. "Seriously, Jaron, thank you again," she chirped, turning to him. "You single-handedly saved me from a very long, very wet walk and my mom from a full-blown anxiety attack." He managed a nod, his eyes still inadvertently drawn to Elara, who had now descended the last few steps from the porch, her gaze unwavering. A faint, polite smile touched her lips, a brief, almost imperceptible acknowledgement of his presence. He felt a peculiar heat rising in his cheeks, a blush he hadn't experienced since his most awkward high school encounters. "No problem at all, Lila," he managed, his voice sounding a little rougher than he intended, a slight gravel to it he didn't recognize. "Glad I could help." Lila, still radiating relief, waved a quick farewell and hurried towards her mother, calling out, "Mom, this is Jaron! He drove me home because of the crazy storm. Elara's gaze softened almost imperceptibly as it shifted from him to her daughter. A genuine, tender smile bloomed on her face as Lila reached her side, and she wrapped an arm protectively around Lila's shoulders. Then, those captivating amber eyes returned to Jaron, and the polite smile deepened, revealing a faint, alluring dimple at the corner of her mouth. "Jaron, thank you so much for bringing Lila home," Elara called out, her voice a low, melodious alto that seemed to ripple through the damp evening air, carrying a surprising warmth. It was refined, cultured, and unexpectedly disarming. "It was truly very kind of you to go out of your way, especially in this dreadful weather." He pushed open his car door, stepping out into the lingering drizzle, feeling the cool dampness on his skin. He stood awkwardly beside the wanderer, suddenly acutely aware of his worn jeans, his slightly damp hair, and the vast chasm of apparent sophistication between them. "It was no trouble at all, Ms. Vance. Happy to help," he replied, his voice feeling stiff and unnatural. "Please, call me Elara," she said, taking a deliberate step closer, her smile unwavering. She extended a graceful hand, her fingers long and slender, tipped with perfectly manicured nails. Her touch was brief, firm, and surprisingly warm against his. Jaron's hand, calloused from years of handling coffee mugs, scrubbing counters, and wrestling with old records, felt suddenly clumsy, oversized in hers. A faint, almost imperceptible scent of jasmine and something else, something subtle and undeniably expensive, clung to her, enveloping him in an intoxicating cloud. "Jaron," he replied, a little too quickly, feeling a fresh wave of self-consciousness wash over him. "Nice to meet you." "Likewise," she said, her gaze holding his for a fraction of a second longer than was strictly necessary. That fleeting moment seemed to stretch, filled with an unreadable quality in her eyes, a hint of something beneath the surface that he couldn't quite decipher. It wasn't overt flirtation, not at all, but something more profound, more knowing. It unsettled him, vibrating through his senses like a plucked string. "Well, I should probably get going," Jaron said, gesturing vaguely back towards the street, eager to escape the potent pull of her presence. "It's getting late, and I've got an early shift tomorrow." He needed to regain his composure, to put some rational distance between himself and the disorienting intensity of her. "Of course," Elara replied, but she didn't immediately step back. Instead, she paused, her gaze drifting over his old car, then back to him, a thoughtful expression on her face. "Are you sure you wouldn't like to come in for a cup of tea, Jaron? Just to warm up properly after driving in this chill? It's the very least we could offer as a token of our gratitude." The offer, so simple, so polite, felt charged with an unspoken invitation, a subtle weight beneath the words. He could feel Lila's eyes on him, a hopeful, expectant expression on her face. To refuse would be rude, ungracious, especially to Lila's mother. And a deeper, unacknowledged part of him, the part inexplicably drawn to the quiet mystery of Elara Vance, felt a strange, compelling pull to accept. "Oh, you really don't have to go to any trouble," he started, but Elara cut him off with a gentle, dismissive wave of her hand. "Nonsense. Please, we insist." "It would be our pleasure." There was a quiet authority in her tone, a subtle command that made polite refusal seem almost impossible. "Okay then, just for a moment," Jaron conceded, a peculiar mix of unease and a thrilling, terrifying anticipation bubbling in his chest. He followed them up the flagstone path, the sound of his footsteps echoing on the wet stone, feeling like he was walking into a dream. The interior of the Vance home was even more breathtaking than its exterior promised. It was a symphony of understated luxury. Cream-colored walls adorned with striking modern art, gleaming dark wood furniture, and plush, inviting textures underfoot. Soft, recessed lighting cast a warm, inviting glow, highlighting exquisite details. There was a sense of quiet opulence, of curated comfort, that spoke volumes of refined taste. The air inside was warm and dry, carrying a faint, lingering aroma of old books, polished wood, and something delicately floral that he now recognized as Elara's signature scent. "Make yourself comfortable, Jaron," Elara said, gesturing towards a vast, plush velvet sofa in the expansive living room. "Lila, why don't you make us some tea? Jaron, what would you prefer? Black, green, herbal?" "Whatever you're having is fine, Elara," he replied, feeling a little overwhelmed by the sheer elegance of the space. He perched tentatively on the edge of the sofa, feeling oddly out of place, like a stray cat in a meticulously arranged art gallery. He clasped his hands in his lap, trying to appear relaxed, but his nerves hummed beneath his skin, a tight, buzzing awareness. Lila, ever the accommodating daughter, disappeared into the grand kitchen, leaving Jaron alone with Elara. The silence that settled between them was not awkward, as he might have expected, but surprisingly comfortable, almost companionable. Elara moved with a quiet, fluid grace, walking to a large bay window that overlooked the rain-soaked garden. Her back was to him, and he found himself observing the elegant line of her neck, the way her dark hair cascaded over her shoulders, a testament to its richness. There was a subtle vulnerability in her posture, a slight droop to her shoulders that hinted at a deeper weariness, a burden carried silently. "It's a truly beautiful home," Jaron ventured, breaking the comfortable quiet, his voice a little softer than usual. Elara turned, a faint, melancholic smile touching her lips. "Thank you. It's been a continuous work in progress, really. It was my husband's passion project, this house. He spent years designing every single detail, poring over every last finish." Her voice softened almost imperceptibly on the word husband, a subtle ripple of sorrow in her tone. After he passed, it felt a little too vast, a little too empty, as if the walls echoed his absence. But we've made it work, Lila and I. We've carved out our own peace here. Jaron felt a sharp pang of empathy. The raw honesty in her voice, the quiet admission of such profound loss, was disarmingly intimate. It was a stark contrast to the composed, elegant woman he had first encountered. "I can only imagine," he said, his voice quiet, genuine. "Lila mentioned your husband passed away. I'm truly sorry for your loss. It must have been incredibly difficult." Her gaze, when it met his, was direct, unflinching, yet surprisingly gentle. "Thank you, Jaron. It was a long time ago now, but some things, some absences, they never truly fade, do they? They just become a part of the landscape of your life." Her words were not a question, but a quiet, shared statement, an unspoken understanding of grief's persistent, shape-shifting shadow. He found himself nodding slowly, a distant memory of his own grandmother's passing, a quiet, lingering ache that still surfaced unexpectedly coming to mind. "No," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "They don't. They just change their form. The sharp edges become a little smoother, but the space they left is always there." A soft, almost imperceptible sigh escaped her lips, a tiny exhalation of release. "Precisely," she murmured, a flicker of relief in her eyes, as if he had just articulated a truth she often carried alone, unspoken. "You understand." The connection, though brief and unexpected, felt surprisingly profound, a small, fragile bridge built between them in the quiet, opulent living room. It was a moment of shared humanity, a recognition of mutual vulnerability. Lila returned then, carrying a gleaming silver tray laden with 3 steaming mugs and a plate piled high with delicate shortbread cookies. The gentle clinking of the porcelain cups broke the fragile intimacy that had formed between Jaron and Elara, pulling them back from the precipice of unspoken emotion. "Here we go," Lila announced cheerfully, her presence a burst of youthful energy. She set the tray down carefully on the large, ornate coffee table. "Mom's special blend. She says it cures all ills, from broken hearts to bad traffic." Elara chuckled, a soft melodic sound that warmed the air. "Only if you truly believe it does, darling. Faith, as they say, moves mountains." She poured the tea, her movements precise and elegant, her slender fingers gracefully handling the delicate porcelain. As she handed Jaron a mug, her fingertips brushed his, a fleeting contact that sent a subtle but undeniable jolt through him. He caught a quick glimpse of her eyes as she looked up, and for a split second, he saw something flicker there, a spark of unexpected curiosity, a hint of something deeper, something vulnerable, before she quickly masked it, her expression returning to one of polite composure. They talked for a while, the conversation flowing easily between the three of them, a comfortable blend of casual chatter and deeper observations. Lila recounted a particularly amusing anecdote about a notoriously demanding customer at the coffee shop, making Elara laugh, a rich, full sound that filled the room. Jaron, feeling a little more at ease now, shared a story about a misadventure he'd had trying to coax life back into a temperamental vintage record player, a relic even older than the Wanderer. Elara listened attentively, her gaze often resting on him, a thoughtful, almost contemplative expression on her face. She asked questions about his aspirations, about his dream of opening his own record store, and her interest seemed genuine, not merely polite. There was a quiet intensity in her listening, as if she were absorbing not just his words, but the very essence of his ambition. As the hour grew later, and the soft patter of the rain outside finally dwindled to an intermittent whisper, Jaron realized he should leave. He didn't want to overstay his welcome, didn't want to disturb the peaceful rhythm of their evening, or risk pushing the comfortable boundaries they'd established. He stood up, feeling a reluctant pull, a strange urge to linger just a little longer in the warm, inviting space. "Well, I really should be going now," he said, his voice betraying a hint of reluctance. "Thank you both so much for the tea, and of course for the rescue, Lila." Lila smiled warmly, her eyes bright. "Any time, Jaron. And thanks again for the ride. Seriously, you're a lifesaver." Elara rose as well, her height making him feel a little less gangly, a little less awkward. She walked him to the grand front door, the soft, recessed light from the hallway illuminating her features with a gentle glow. "It was a genuine pleasure meeting you, Jaron," she said, her voice quiet, almost a whisper, yet resonating with an unexpected depth. Her gaze held his, and this time there was no mask, no hidden flicker. Her eyes were direct, unblinking, and in their amber depths he saw a profound sadness, a quiet yearning that seemed to ache beneath the surface. He felt an inexplicable urge to reach out, to offer some form of comfort, but he simply stood there, frozen, suspended in the moment. "You too, Elara," he managed, his voice barely audible, a raw whisper of acknowledgement. She paused, her hand resting lightly on the ornate doorknob. The moment stretched, elongated, filled with a palpable, unspoken tension that vibrated in the very air between them. Her gaze, for a fraction of a second, dropped to his lips, then quickly returned to his eyes, a fleeting flicker of something unreadable passing through her amber depths. He felt his heart pound, a rapid, insistent rhythm against his ribs, mirroring the sudden acceleration of his breath. Then, with a gentle, almost imperceptible click, she opened the door, letting in the cool, damp night air, fresh and clean after the storm. "Drive safe, Jaron," she murmured, her voice soft, almost like a caress. He nodded, unable to articulate anything more, the words catching in his throat. He stepped out onto the wide, welcoming porch, turning for one last, lingering glance. Elara stood framed in the doorway, her elegant figure silhouetted against the warm interior light, a silent, graceful sentinel. Her gaze, he felt, followed him as he walked back to his car, and he felt the quiet weight of it, a lingering presence that stayed with him even as he started the Wanderer's rumbling engine and pulled away from the serene elegance of Willowbrook Crescent. He couldn't shake the profound, unsettling feeling that something fundamental had shifted within him, a silent tectonic plate moving deep beneath the surface of his life. What happens now? no one expected. But it's what restores fairness. The days that followed Jaron's visit to Willowbrook Crescent were imbued with a strange, almost electric hum. The image of Elara Vance, the quiet intensity of her gaze, the lingering scent of jasmine and the subtle vulnerability beneath her poised exterior became a persistent, beautiful ache in his thoughts. He found himself replaying every subtle glance, every shared silence, every inflection in her voice. It was a dangerous game, he knew, a treacherous path he was unwillingly walking, especially with Lila's easy affection a constant presence in his life. He felt a sharp, almost suffocating pang of guilt every time Lila's cheerful texts popped up on his phone, every time he heard her bright, innocent laugh. He tried to focus on her, on the simple, comfortable familiarity of their budding relationship, but his mind inevitably, relentlessly, drifted back to Elara. A week later, just as Jaron was beginning to convince himself that the encounter had been nothing more than an innocent, if emotionally charged, courtesy call, Lila's voice, laced with frustration, came through his phone. "Jaron, you won't believe it. My mom's old stereo system, the one you worked on, it's acting up again. She's got a huge client presentation coming up, and she needs to play some specific classical pieces for it. It just went completely unresponsive again. I tried everything, but you know me. I'm useless with anything that doesn't have a power button and a touchscreen. She remembered how quickly you fixed it last time, and she was so impressed. Would you mind terribly taking another look? She's getting a bit frantic, honestly." Jaron's stomach did a peculiar flip, a blend of dread and an undeniable surge of something akin to excitement. His first, rational instinct screamed for him to politely decline, to create distance, to extinguish the dangerous spark that had ignited within him. But then, the image of Elara, her brow furrowed in quiet distress over a technical glitch, surfaced in his mind, and a deeper, more compelling urge, one he couldn't articulate even to himself, tugged at him, drawing him inexorably forward. He was genuinely skilled with electronics, especially vintage audio equipment. He could help. He wanted to help. "Sure, Lila, no problem at all," he heard himself say, his voice surprisingly steady, almost eager. "Tell her I can stop by tomorrow afternoon, right after my shift at the Copper Kettle. Around 4, if that works for her." "Oh, Jaron, you're an absolute lifesaver!" Lila exclaimed, her frustration replaced by palpable relief. "She'll be absolutely thrilled. See you then." Her genuine happiness twisted a fresh pang of guilt in his gut. The next day, the knot of anticipation in Jaron's chest tightened with every mile he drove towards Willowbrook Crescent. The sky was a vast, clear expanse of sapphire blue, scrubbed clean by the previous week's storm. The air was crisp and cool, carrying the faint, earthy scent of damp soil and blooming azaleas. He pulled into the familiar winding driveway, parking the wanderer a little further from the grand house this time, a futile, subconscious attempt to minimize its perceived shabbiness against the backdrop of such elegance. Elara opened the door before he could even reach for the antique brass knocker, as if she had been waiting, sensing his arrival. She was dressed in a simple tailored blouse the color of deep emerald, and dark, impeccably cut trousers. Her rich, dark hair was artfully pinned up, revealing the elegant curve of her neck, a delicate line that drew his eye. Her amber eyes, when they met his, held a faint sparkle, a hint of something unreadable beneath a veneer of polite gratitude, a quiet intensity he remembered so vividly. "Jaron, thank you for coming again," she said, her voice warm, yet with a subtle undercurrent he still couldn't quite place, a hint of vulnerability, perhaps, or a quiet anticipation. "Lila mentioned you were available. It's truly a lifesaver. This old thing is my prized possession, a relic from my youth, and I feel utterly lost without its music." She gestured towards the magnificent, ornate stereo console in the living room, a vintage masterpiece that looked more like a meticulously crafted piece of furniture than an electronic device. "No problem, Elara. Happy to help, really," he replied, feeling a familiar awkwardness creeping into his limbs. He tried to meet her gaze directly, but found his eyes drifting, almost involuntarily, to the slight curve of her smile, the delicate line of her jaw, the way a single strand of dark hair had escaped its pin and curled softly against her temple. She led him into the living room, her movements fluid and graceful. The stereo console was an impressive piece of machinery, a true classic from the 1970s, with a gleaming chrome turntable, a robust cassette deck, and an array of intricate dials. Jaron immediately felt a surge of familiar comfort as he knelt before it, pulling out his small, worn toolkit. This was his territory, his area of expertise, a world he understood intimately. It just stopped responding again, Elara explained, standing a respectful distance away, her hands clasped loosely in front of her. No power, no sound, nothing. I tried all the obvious things, checking the plugs, the switches, but it's entirely beyond my technical capabilities. It's almost as if it's playing hard to get. She offered a wry, almost self-deprecating smile. Jaron hummed in acknowledgement, already carefully taking off the ornate back panel. The faint, intoxicating scent of her perfume, that subtle jasmine and sophisticated undertone, mingled with the dusty, aged wood of the stereo, creating an intoxicating, almost dizzying mix. He worked methodically, his hands moving with practiced ease, checking the power supply, testing the fuses with a small multimeter, tracing the internal wiring with a focused gaze. He found it quickly. A loose connection, a small, almost invisible wire that had come disconnected from the main circuit board. It was a deceptively simple fix, but one that required a keen eye, steady hands, and an understanding of the intricate dance of electrons. As he worked, Elara remained in the room, moving quietly, a silent, elegant presence. She picked up a heavy art book from the coffee table, leafed through its pages, adjusted a velvet curtain to let in more of the afternoon light. She didn't hover, didn't comment, but her presence was a constant warm hum in the background, a subtle awareness that permeated the air. Every now and then he would feel her gaze on him, a soft, unwavering weight, and he would unconsciously straighten his back, his movements becoming even more precise, more deliberate. After about 20 minutes, Jaron reconnected the errant wire, tightened a few tiny screws, and carefully replaced the back panel. He then reached for the power button. With a soft, almost triumphant click, the display lit up, glowing a warm, reassuring amber. "Ah!" Elara exclaimed, a genuine note of relief and pleasure in her voice, a lightness he hadn't heard before. "It's alive! Oh, Jaron, you truly are a magician. I was convinced it was beyond repair." He chuckled, standing up, dusting his hands on his worn jeans. "Just a loose connection, Elara. Nothing magical, I promise. These old beauties often just need a little gentle persuasion." He then placed a classical CD, one of hers he assumed, into the tray. The rich, orchestral music of a Bach concerto filled the spacious room, warm and resonant, creating an immediate, enveloping atmosphere. Elara closed her eyes for a moment, letting the music wash over her, a serene, almost blissful expression on her face. Her shoulders seemed to relax, a subtle tension draining from her posture. When she opened her eyes, they were luminous, reflecting the soft light from the speakers, shining with a quiet joy. "Thank you, truly," she said, her voice soft, imbued with heartfelt gratitude. "You have no idea how much I appreciate this. That particular piece, it always calms me. It speaks to something deep inside." "Happy to help," Jaron repeated, feeling a quiet satisfaction, a genuine pleasure in having provided her this small comfort. He began to gather his tools, ready to make his polite exit. But Elara didn't move. She stood watching him, her arms crossed loosely over her chest, her posture one of thoughtful contemplation. "You're very good at what you do, Jaron," she said, her voice soft, almost meditative. "You have a passion for it, I can tell. It's rare and refreshing to see someone so dedicated to their craft, to something as tangible and honest as sound." He felt a blush creep up his neck, a familiar warmth spreading across his cheeks. "Thanks. Records and old electronics, they make sense to me, I guess. They have stories." She nodded slowly, a profound understanding in her eyes. Some things just do, don't they? Some connections feel natural, almost inevitable, even when you don't expect them, even when they challenge everything you thought you knew. Her voice was soft, barely above a murmur, and her gaze held his, a profound depth in her amber eyes that seemed to pull him deeper, inviting him into an unspoken conversation. The classical music played on, a poignant, almost melancholic melody, weaving itself into the charged atmosphere. Jaron felt an unfamiliar tremor run through him, a jolt that went deeper than physical sensation. Her words, delivered with such quiet intensity, seemed to echo his own unspoken thoughts, to articulate the nameless current that had flowed between them since that first meeting. He felt a strange, magnetic pull towards her, a desire to bridge the invisible space between them, to understand the depth in her eyes. He cleared his throat, suddenly finding it difficult to breathe normally, as if the air itself had grown thick with unspoken emotion. "Well, I really should head out," he said, his voice a little strained, a desperate attempt to break the spell. "Lila should be home soon, and I don't want to be in the way." Elara's gaze didn't waver, holding his with an unwavering intensity that made his heart pound. "Lila's at a friend's house for a study group," she revealed, her voice calm, almost detached. "She won't be back for hours. She often loses track of time when she's engrossed." The revelation hung in the air, a silent acknowledgement of the unexpected intimacy of the moment, of the sudden, profound privacy of the house. Jaron's heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic drumbeat. He felt a sharp, almost suffocating sense of panic, but also a thrilling, terrifying exhilaration. He was alone with Elara Vance, and the silent tension that vibrated in the space between them was almost unbearable, a tangible thing that hummed with unspoken possibilities. Elara took a slow, deliberate step towards him. The late afternoon light from the tall window caught the single silver strand in her dark hair, making it gleam like a whisper of moonlight, a stark, beautiful contrast. "Jaron," she began, her voice barely above a whisper, her eyes never leaving his, mirroring the profound struggle he felt within himself. "There's something I feel like I need to say, something that's been lingering." His breath hitched, a shallow, painful gasp. He knew, with a certainty that resonated deep in his bones, what she was about to say, or rather, what she was about to acknowledge. The unspoken, the impossible, the forbidden. She took another step, closing the distance between them until they were only a few feet apart. He could feel the warmth radiating from her, the delicate scent of jasmine, now stronger, more intoxicating, drawing him in. Her eyes, wide and luminous, filled with a complex, aching mix of vulnerability